that's our vision that we've set ourselves within the Diocese of London over the next 10 years, for every Londoner to encounter the love of God in Jesus Christ. And what that gives us is a framework for mission and ministry through the ambitions and priorities. We need that as a diocesan vision because, of course, we are an Episcopal church, not a congregational one. We're not one where every congregation does its own thing, independent of everybody else, but we are held together by our common worship, our common discipline, and our common being held together by our relationships together with bishops. That's one of the things that episcopacy does. It holds together the church. So that gives us a common sense of direction. And what this vision enables us to do, I think, is as a diocese to work out how we use resources to support parish ministry. This is fundamentally about how do we support the parishes in doing what they're doing. Not about imposing a kind of vision from on top that the parishes all have to deliver. This is not head office telling the kind of employees what to do. This is how do we resource the parishes and the Christian communities and the chaplaincies around our areas to do what they're called to do. But it also helps us to give a kind of level, find an appropriate level of monitoring and evaluation as we look at what we're doing across our diocese, working out what is it that finds the blessing of God, what finds the breath of the Holy Spirit being breathed into it, and so it comes to life, and what doesn't find that, and how we amplify that and makes an impact over the longer term. So we're saying that the Diocesan Vision 2030, of course, is an organic development from what we had in our previous 10 years. You remember in our vision for 2020, we had our 3 C's. The church was going to be more compassionate, confident, and creative. And those, of course, have now become creative discipleship, compassionate communities, and creative growth. And there's particularly continuity with our earlier area priorities. Those of you who've been around in the Kensington area for some time, you'll know we had a number of priorities, and it kind of dovetails with those, particularly the theme of growing younger as well. And what this hopefully gives us is a kind of refreshed openness to looking positively and creatively about how to allocate those main resources we have. And we are well resourced in 3 particular areas: building, finances, and people. How do we use those resources to work towards our vision? And that's the kind of broader diocesan vision. Coming down into the area plan, what this is about is working out what does this look like within the particularities of the Kensington area. What do we feel we are called to do as the church here? How do we particularize this within our different localities, ministries, and traditions within the Kensington area? It's also encouraging local prayer. Again, the idea of this thing is very much not to kind of impose a vision from on high. It's more a framework within which local parishes can think creatively about how you can exercise your ministry and discern what is right locally. And therefore, today is an invitation, not a demand. It's an invitation. That's the thing that we're trying to offer today, an invitation to you and your parishes and PCCs to think creatively about what you can do in your local context, because you know the local context better than I do, but anybody else does. You've got to think about that one, but within the framework of an overarching vision of a diocese and an area, because we belong together and we're not just independent churches. So when we did this exercise of consulting with deanery chapters and deanery synods, I remember there was one particular gathering where it was online during the pandemic. We did a Zoom call. I think I did a whole series of Zooms with deanery synods around the 6 deaneries. And I remember one of them, I can't remember which one it was, and I can't even remember who said it. But someone said, what would be really helpful is under each of these headings, rather than have, 16 different things that we're all meant to do, what's the one big idea? What's the one big idea that would inspire people and would be something that we could share and think about? And that struck me and stayed with me. What is the one key thing in each of these areas that we would kind of invite each other to engage with? And that's what we've tried to do as we've kind of listened to what we've heard from the different deaneries and discussions that have gone on over the past year or so, to kind of focus down on what's the one key idea in each of these 3 ambitions and our 3 priorities that we would want to focus on. And so what I'm going to do today is to kind of lay out, if you like, that one key idea in each of these areas as an invitation to you to think about this and embed it within your local context. So the first one I want to think about is, in this session we've got 3 half hours, a half an hour on confident disciples, half an hour on compassionate communities, half an hour on creative growth. So the first one is confident disciples. That's our first ambition. We talked about being a pilgrim church, growing our confidence as Christian disciples, those who are kind of on a pilgrimage somewhere else, who are committed to our communities and yet belong elsewhere. And our key invitation here, the one kind of big idea that has kind of emerged from our discussions, is the invitation for every parish to work out a rule of life. That every parish and chaplaincy articulate and develop its own rule of life, which is offered to all those who are part of that worshiping community. Now, you may know about rules of life. You may have one yourself. You may have one as a parish, possibly. But what a rule of life does is it gives you a framework for thinking about this is what discipleship, being a disciple of Jesus, looks like. And one of the ideas about a rule of life is, of course, it's infinitely flexible. And the invitation is for you as a parish or a chaplaincy or a BMO or whatever you are to think about, okay, what does discipleship look like in our context? What would the life of a disciple look like for us? And you may all come up with very different rules of life, and that's fine. Ideally, a rule of life would reflect a parish's local identity, your own particular tradition, background, range of ethnicity, types of people, age, and so on. It would focus upon the formation of character and growing in holiness. So what would enable people in your parish to deepen their discipleship and grow in holiness? That'd be challenging enough to stretch and engender genuine spiritual growth, realistic enough that people would engage with it, and encouraging enough that it will enable people to want to take it up. And individual rules would probably offer different ways of engaging. There may not even be a one-size-fits-all for one parish, but also are capable of being refreshed so that people can envisage themselves taking up that long obedience that committed discipleship requires. Now, a rule of life, again, can look very different, and it will look very different in different places. And a rule of life is something that is not imposed, it's not compulsory. It's not like you're saying to everybody in your church, you've got to do this to be a part of our church. But you're simply saying, if you want to know what being a Christian disciple looks like, well, here is a pattern that we offer to you as a way of ordering your life in Christ, building in some disciplines, some structures that will build holiness over time. So that might mean, for example, what are the daily disciplines that you would want to encourage in your people? For some, that might be daily Eucharist. For some, it might be a daily quiet time, reading the Bible and praying in the morning. For some, it will be saying morning prayer, evening prayer. What is the daily discipline that you would be encouraging people in your parish to engage with? Another aspect of it may be meeting together with others. That may be being part of a small group. It may be being part of a prayer triplet. It may be committing to a kind of joint kind of morning prayer online or something like that. A kind of gathering together with a smaller group of others to encourage and to share and to build Christian faith. There might be a kind of more annual focus to it. You say, well, part of our rule of life is that we will, as a church, we will encourage people to go on annual pilgrimage to Walsingham or to a Christian festival focus or New Wine or something like that. That's part of a rule of life, that we would have a discipline of engaging once a year with a kind of major festival of gathering people. There may be a practical element that we would encourage people to have some element of service that they are engaged with people who are disadvantaged in your local community. That may be serving at a food bank, it may be serving at a debt advice center, it may be engaging with something outside the church altogether, but something which is serving those who are less well off than we are. There may be an element of it which is study. Say, well, part of the rule of life in our parish is to engage in a Lent course once a year. Maybe join a study group or a book group, or to meet with others to read something together. Something that will deepen faith and understanding. Maybe you want to say part of our rule of life is to commit to pray for 5 people that you know of who don't yet have a Christian faith, and you want to pray for them to discover that. Now, those are just examples. But really, the idea here is not to impose a rule of life. We haven't got a Kensington area rule of life. We could never have one anyway. But it's the invitation to you as parishes and chaplaincies and communities to think about what might a rule of life look like, which you could offer your people. I think very often people feel that the idea of discipleship is a kind of rather vague idea, that kind of we ought to be Christian disciples, but we don't quite know what that looks like. And a rule of life potentially offers a kind of framework to enable people to engage with it. And again, emphasize we're not offering this as a compulsory thing, you're not offering it as that, but here is a pattern of life which might help people in building their discipleship. Now, we're going to have a brief discussion at this point. Jonathan's going to show us in a moment how we're going to do this, but if I can go on to the next slide. So here are some questions. We've got 20 minutes just to discuss these. We're going to talk about these. So, is rule of life the right language and sufficiently inclusive of all traditions? Does creating one feel doable among the business of clergy lives? Can we keep it fresh? What will help this idea still feel helpful in 2028, 29, 30? And how can, as a Kensington area staff, how can we help parishes adopt this with enthusiasm? So that's the discussion. If I can ask Jonathan to explain how the groups are going to work, and then we'll go from there. Right. Thanks.
Good morning to those I haven't said that to personally so far. Nice to see you. We've got up until 11 o'clock, if you could be, up till 12 o'clock, if you could be back promptly, because Graham will come back onto the second and then the third ambition at that point. There's been a lot of talking from the front, but we do want to hear from you as well through this day. There's over 100 of us here, so giving everybody even 2 minutes would just absorb the rest of the day for us. So we won't be hearing back from the groups, but we're asking for someone to facilitate each of the groups, which means helping the conversation move along and also taking notes. And whoever that person is, if you could email Bishop Graham with a copy to me by the end of the weekend, that would be really helpful to get the comments that have come out of your individual groups. Area deans, if you're here, will be leading one of the groups in your deanery. Some deaneries are a bit well represented today, and there's more than one group out of the deanery. So if there's a second group, could you either appoint someone from within that group, or maybe the area dean can, if they haven't already, sort of finger somebody and point them out. Your card will have a colour band on it. If your deanery has more than one group, your colour determines which group you're in. So Richard's complaining he hasn't got one. Okay, beg your pardon. Somewhere, one side or the other, you'll have a colour band which will tell you which group to move into. To make this quick and easy, can I suggest if you're in Chelsea deanery, you come to my left at the front here. You'll need to move the chairs around and just get yourselves into 2 groups. There are 2 groups in Chelsea. Hampton similarly, but at the back, 2 groups there. Hammersmith and Fulham, my right at the front. Again, there are 2 groups there. Hounslow at the back here, 2 groups again. If you're in Kensington, into the lobby, there's just one group there. And if you're in Spelthorne, come higher, friend. There is space behind me there to occupy there. That there are questions on the slide. Use that as a starting point. If other questions come up, that's absolutely fine. Don't feel that they need to restrict you. Back here at 12 o'clock.